Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Goldwater Alumni panel. I know we have a quick hour ahead of us, so we'll jump right into it and have our panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll leave some time at the very end for our attendees to ask some questions of the panelists. So obvious introductions. My name is Jesse Wieland. I'm the Associate Director at the Office of National Fellowships, and I lead recruitment and advising for the Goldwater Scholarship. I have a couple colleagues here with me as well, if you'd like to quickly introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Garcia Glockner. I'm the Assistant Director for O&M.
Hi there, I'm Sam Beal, and I am the Program Coordinator at ONF.
And so I think it's great to know everyone in our small team, because we all specialize in different fellowships, many different STEM fellowships that may connect to the Goldwater Scholarship. So of course, in addition to reaching out to us about Goldwater, make sure to reach out to us about some of these other fellowships as well. But now I want to turn it over to our panelists, Sophie, Shahid, and Jack. If all of you would like to briefly introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about where you're from and what your involvement at Florida State looked like, and tell us where you are now. And maybe Jack, we could start with you.
Hey, I'm Jack. So I'm actually from Tallahassee. I did undergraduate research in the physics department at FSU under Dr. Hanwei Gao in condensed matter physics. Now I'm currently a PhD student at Indiana in quantum computing. Yes, I suppose that sums up so far.
Do you want to go, Sophie?
Yeah, I can go. Hi everyone, my name is Sophie. I am from Wauchula, Florida, and I just recently graduated. But when I was at FSU, I was involved in research in the psychology department with Dr. Chris Martin and Dr. Chris Patrick. And then I was also involved with research in the scientific computing department with Dr. Alan Lemon. And currently, I'm a first-year PhD student at Yale University, where I'm studying cognitive neuroscience.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shahid Paris. I'm originally from Belize and not also out of the United States. But I'm currently a physics and math double major here at FSU. At the time of doing the Goldwater Scholarship, I was doing cosmology research with Dr. Kevin Hoffenberger in the physics department, but now I'm doing high energy theory research, also with a professor in the physics department.
Thank you. And so this is often a question that appears in the Goldwater application, as you all well know, and definitely something that our applicants need to reflect on. But could all of you talk a little bit more about what was your initial introduction into research, whether that was, in high school or during your time at Florida State? And can you talk about how that process went? Was it that first experience that really confirmed for you that you wanted to do research, or I guess did it take a little bit more convincing through some of your other involvement? So a little bit more about that initial introduction into the research realm.
I can go. So my initial introduction to research was my second semester of my freshman year. I was told at the end of my first semester to get involved in research just because I was maybe interested in doing research, but I didn't really know because I had never done it before. And so I just reached out to just a random professor that when I read his research description, I was like, this sounds interesting. I'm gonna email him. And then it just so happened that he was a new professor. He had just started. This is Dr. Chris Martin. He had started that fall, the same time that I started at FSU. And so I was one of his first undergraduate students to work in his lab. And then from there, my first semester of my sophomore year, I joined Dr. Chris Patrick's and Dr. Alan Lemon's lab. but my primary research interest aligns more with Dr. Chris Martin, which is what I ended up writing my research statement about, is my research in that lab. So I think just like having other experiences in other labs, because Dr. Chris Patrick was a clinical neuroscience lab, and then Dr. Alan Lemon, I was doing computational modeling of frog neurons. And so having like a diverse range of experience, I think allowed me to see that like I was interested in cognitive neuroscience and what I was doing in Dr. Chris Martin's lab. And then my additional research experience kind of helped shaped my unique interest in like computational modeling and memory and electrophysiology.
I could go next. Initially, as is common in physics a lot, when you're applying, especially because I wanted to apply to grad school, it was important that I had some undergraduate research experience. And so I would say as a sophomore, I really started looking into professors that I could do research with. And there was this, like I said, I looked at Dr. Kevin Huffenberger research because he was doing research in astrophysics, and he also took a lot of undergraduates before when I read his profile page. So I figured that if I applied to him, I might be able to get a position. And I was right. I was able to do research under him. And it was very interesting. We did a lot of computational cosmology stuff. I don't need to get into the details of it, but it was definitely a good introductory to a research experience. And it went a long way into applying to other research experiences or looking into other labs. So yeah.
I'll go ahead and go next. So for me, I had definitely an interesting path. So I actually started off as a music major. I didn't even become a physics major until my third year. And so that's when I got into research. I completely cold emailed like a bunch of physics professors in the physics department. And Dr. Hanwei Gao was the first one to reach out and, willing to take me on in his condensed matter physics lab. And so, that was pretty cool for me because I got to do a lot of hands-on stuff and get familiar with research. And then I think for me, the first aha moment was when I got to, run my first experiment, take my first set of results. And that actually first experiment that I ran with him over the summer was what laid the foundation for my Goldwater application.
Can all of you talk about your initial, because getting involved in research is obviously one thing, and then, kind of learning how to navigate the realm of fellowship applications is, a whole other monster to tackle. So can you talk about your initial perceptions? Like, how did you hear about the Goldwater Scholarship? What did you initially think about the Goldwater Scholarship? And how did you ultimately come to the decision that you wanted to apply for the award?
I think for me, I was told actually by my mom to look for scholarships to apply for. She told me that I needed to because I have like scholarships coming in from CARE and other places and like the Florida Bright Futures. But just to like make sure that I have enough to cover everything to like actually look for other scholarships. And so I was looking on the ONF website, and they have a nice list of things of all of the fellowships, and I like filtered it by the things that would be relevant to me. And that's when I found Goldwater, and I think that this was conveniently like my sophomore year, like beginning, so like the end of August, and that was like right before the application portal opens up, because I believe it opens up like Labor Day weekend or something like that. And so that's when I started debating it, but I had a discussion with Dr. Martin, who is Canadian. He had no idea what this fellowship was. So he was like, if you want to apply to it, you can apply to it, but you don't have to. And then I had other conversations with other people. And then there's also someone else in Dr. Chris Martin's lab at that time who had previously gotten the Goldwater. And she said that it was very unlikely for a sophomore to get it, but she also got it as a sophomore, I believe. But it was very unlikely for a sophomore to get it, and that because they have less research experience, because there's less opportunity as just a second year to actually have research being done already. And so I wasn't initially going to apply for it, but then I thought about the benefit of just going through the application process, even though I don't have like a research project that was like done. I was still like developing it. It still helped me to like think about it and go through it. And so I decided to actually apply just because of the benefit it was to me and how I thought about my research.
Yeah, I could add in now. Funny enough, I actually first heard about the Goldwater Scholarship from, well, I learned about it through Jack because he applied the year before me and he got it. So that was when I was actually looking into the Goldwater Scholarship, and I saw that it's really good if you have it on your CVs, your resumes, and it does provide that extra buffer of money in case, you know, something like your Bright Futures runs out or something along those lines. So definitely that was one of my first scholarships that I was looking into, especially for STEM. And I would say like it did seem like a very daunting application at first. Like from my perspective, I was still doing research. I applied to the Goldwater Scholarship in my junior year, but I was still kind of developing my research. It wasn't completed as yet, and I was quite unsure if I really had adequate research. But I realized like those you should never let those fears hold you back from actually applying. You know, you should let the actual application writers, or well, not the writers, but the people reviewing your application tell that to you. So that's my
I actually
Yeah,
found
and
out.
so it brings up a good point about the difference between sophomores and juniors who apply. Like while you're part of one entire applicant pool, a sophomore or a junior applicant is not inherently more competitive than a sophomore applicant because they understand juniors have an additional year of experience, and so they do review these um uh differently, you know, but in a way that hopefully, you know, provides equal access for students. But it is more common for people to apply in their junior year. But don't, as Shahid said, you know, opt out yourself. But I think this is a good transition into the next question as well, which is focusing a little bit more on the application process. This is my 7th year working with Goldwater Scholars, and every cycle and with every student, there's different aspects of the application that kind of uniquely challenges them. If you recall from when you were applying, can you speak to whether it was one of the components or one, you know, one of the essays, you know, or the recommendation letters, but what was it that really kind of tripped you up as you were working on the application?
I guess maybe you could go, Jack.
Um, uh, I think for me, one of the biggest things was, you know, really understanding what I was writing for and the audience I was trying to write for. You know, going through all the different rough drafts and stuff, the biggest challenge, you know, I definitely faced was understanding how to, you know, write a research essay and proposal that encapsulates my entire undergraduate experience and, you know, effectively communicates that to people who may not be physicists or condensed matter physicists, but also conveys, you know, the importance and the significance of my research and why I should be selected as an applicant. And I feel like navigating that gray area between, you know, scientific detail and writing a general application such that any reviewer can read and appreciate my work was definitely one of the most challenging things for me.
I could say for sure, one of the difficulties in the application process was definitely the essays. Just the amount of times you have to review your essays, make sure they're concise, make sure you elaborate the information you want to elaborate in them. It takes a lot of time, and they don't give you a very long word limit. I believe the personal essay is just 3,000 characters from the last time I applied, and the other essays are even shorter. So you have to be very concise in those applications.
I think for me, I had one specific prompt that I had a lot of difficulty with, and I don't know if this is still a prompt, but it was like, describe what has like shaped your research interest, or like what has shaped your career in science or something like that. And after reading through a few that had been sent to me, it seemed like they had like this one big like thing to happen to them, that they were like, this one thing changed my idea. Whereas for me, it was like an accumulation of things. It was like, I went to this thing in high school that introduced me to psychology and neuroscience. And then I was like, maybe I'll do some research. And then it was like, then I'll maybe do some computational modeling just because. And then it was like kind of just like this accumulation of things. And then once I looked back and reflected, I was like, oh, this is what I'm interested in, because of all these different things. And so I was trying, I think I wanted it to be like as compelling as these other essays that were like, this one thing is what made me choose a career in research. But yeah, I think I ended up writing about like just like the most mundane thing about like multiple things throughout the years that have like led me into choosing a career in research. But that was probably the hardest. I think I remember like it being like the last thing I wrote.
But I think that's a good point, in that, you know, your application isn't anyone else's. And so if that wasn't your experience, it's impossible to write to. But you work with what you have. Which is actually, so this is my next question, is actually something that none of you had to do when you were applying, but it's something that students have to do now. So all applicants for Goldwater need to sign a pledge stating that they did not use AI software to assist them in the development of their application or their essays. And I think knowing specifically for all of you the number of meetings that we had to go over these essays, can you, I mean, if you have any thoughts on the use of AI when it comes to academics or academic writing, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, and the pledge that students have to sign now.
I could probably go. At least when I first thought about this, I think for sure AI does have a big benefit to society in general, in terms of what it can do and its capabilities. But in terms of just writing an application, right, the people reviewing the application wants to see you in that application, and sometimes the AI can't capture that. You know, it's a very generic kind of modeling tool, and by signing this pledge, it's more of like to help you write a better application, in my mind, right? So you kind of think about your experiences, your research more in depth, and then you put that on paper.
Yeah, I think I agree with Shahid. It's obviously a resource that is easily available now, and will likely forever be available. And so students will likely be tempted. But I think that the application process as a whole helped me think about my research and understand it better, and also helped me to actually develop questions Whereas if you were to use AI, it probably wouldn't be like as helpful, like the application process. And I know for many people, the application process of Goldwater, because it happens so early in your like undergrad, that it actually tends to help you think about how research works and where you want to go in your research career. And also I find that most AI written essays aren't like that great. Like you can, for the most part, tell, even though there's no like explicit, yes, this is written by AI that's like reliable, you can like usually tell when it's like devoid of any like personality and feelings, which I think is very important for an application, especially like Goldwater. So yeah.
So the Goldwater application does have a pretty like one track mind in terms of what they're looking for. Like obviously they're looking for students that are engaged in STEM research that plan to go on to pursue a PhD in graduate school on way towards a career in research in their field of study. As you all were working on the application, like did you find it difficult when talking about your goals and in analyzing your experiences to find that congruency with Goldwater's mission, if that makes sense? Was there like a resource or a mentor that you had that, or how did you find that congruency in your application, I suppose is my question, between what you're doing, the research that you're doing, the goals that you have, and how this all kind of fits together?
For me, I think I definitely struggled at first just because the lines were definitely blurred for me, and you know, I kept tying back stuff to music, and that definitely created some challenges and blurred some lines for me. But you know, I think the biggest thing, honestly, was all the revision sessions I got to do with you, and like having you help me out navigate that, and just revising again and again and again, and getting to like think about it and let it simmer, you know, in the back of my head. Really, I think helped make a very nice narrative come to fruition.
Yeah, I could add in now. I think at least for me, when I went into physics, I knew that I wanted to do research. So ultimately, I would end up having to do a PhD in physics. So that wasn't so much of a hindrance to me. It was definitely a little difficult actually talking about it, because one thing is to have it, as your goal, but another thing is to actually put it on paper. And so that's something that was a little tough to write about at first.
Yeah, I knew that I really liked doing research and that I wanted to continue doing research, but I didn't know how to get there. I didn't know like the steps that I had to take. And so I think like talking with my mentors and having them like step me through what like a typical like student who wants to do like cognitive neuroscience research would do really helped me like actually plan my goals, because before that my goal was to just jump straight to research in cognitive neuroscience. But yeah, I like having to actually like lay out the plans, which happened to also align with like what Goldwater expects, which is just like individuals in the STEM field wanting to pursue a PhD.
And well, Sophie and Jack, you both kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'm happy for if you would like to elaborate. But as you all were working on your essays, particularly the personal essays, was there anything that you initially saw as a hindrance that you had to address in your application? And Jack, I think the talking about music is a really great example, because I think at one point we we did toy with the idea of like, well, do we take it out entirely? And clearly the decision we came to was now let's just lean into it more. But can you talk like if there was like an aspect of your story, your experience, your transcript, I don't know, anything that you felt like I need to talk about this or I need to explain this in my application a little bit more fully?
I think for me, I think again the biggest thing is that since I started with 2 years worth of music under my belt and started the physics track definitely later. I think when constructing my application, we briefly touched on the music since it is part of my journey to becoming a physicist. And then we slightly maneuvered the application such that it does still have a physics focus, and that music kind of took more of a back seat. But we ended up navigating music by using music to help justify why my experiences in music help make me a successful researcher. Even writing all my statement of purposes for grad school, I really leaned in on that. And when chatting with all the admissions after the fact, all of them absolutely loved how I was able to spin music as a positive aspect of my life that has contributed to me being a successful researcher rather than shying away from it and brushing it under the rug.
I had before coming to going to FSU, I did dual enrollment through my high school. And I had a really tough time because I just going from like my really small high school in Central Florida to a community college, just taking like more advanced classes, I struggled. And I couldn't really like figure things out. And I was still like, just in my hometown. And so I didn't get the best of grades. Like they were passing, but they were like C's. And so that was on my transcript because these were college classes and they counted towards my degree. And so I kind of thought that like if Goldwater does indeed care about GPA, that I should probably talk about this and explain it. And so I did have to explain like the process of being a first generation college student and like having like this expectation of just staying in my hometown, but like wanting to pursue other things outside of my hometown, and not being prepared for how hard that was. And so, yeah, I had to explain why like the very first thing you see on my transcript is a C in like college algebra. And so, yeah, that was probably the thing that I thought was a hindrance, but obviously it didn't hinder anything. But yeah.
I'll say I just have one small point on this question, but indeed, I think one thing that I noticed a lot was that the Goldwater would ask if you presented at any conferences, especially for your particular research. And I thought that was one thing that I didn't really have much experience in. And so I did touch on that in my personal essay, just talking about what experience I did have in my research and how it transitioned into the research I was doing then. So definitely, if you have anything that you're not too sure about, you touch on that in those essays.
And so something that I think some attendees and some people who will watch the recording may not know about the Goldwater is that first, all of you had to go through a university nomination process before your application could then move forward. And so can you talk a little bit about what was it to first earn the nomination? And then was there anything maybe that you had to change about your application before the final deadline? Because something that I try to tell students is that you have to consider your application in two phases. Phase one is earn university nomination, and then phase two is if it's endorsed. What do I need to do before I submitted. So if that makes sense, can you talk about like, yeah, what the nomination meant for you, and then what you had to do between mid-November and the end of January?
I could start off, I guess. I think definitely let me see. It's definitely a tough question, you know. Um, but like in terms of the nomination process, it does give you a lot of feedback on your application, because you need you need those eyes from the other professors in other fields as well, not just your own, to really see, oh, maybe this is not as well explained as they would like, and that could really be a good benefit to your application. I think for mines in particular, there were a few comments, especially on the research side, just to explain a little bit more of the details. But definitely consider their comments and also review them with your mentors.
I just had to go and find that email because I I couldn't recall what exactly my feedback was. And I had 3 points. One of which was like really emphasizing the fact that my FSU GPA was really high. At that point, I think I had gotten almost all A's, but my transfer credits were nowhere near as high as my FSU GPA, and so I had to put more emphasis on that. And then they also commented, not as a critique, but just as an encouragement, that I had really strong letters of recommendation and that I should continue to like continue my relationship with my letter recommenders, because they were already so strong, even though I knew only some of them for about 3 or 4 months. And so, yeah, I think that the point of the letter recommenders and it being so strong reinforced my like idea of like actually doing well, and that like people thought that I was doing well, like people I worked for thought I was doing well. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, I honestly had major imposter syndrome throughout. I think again, since I was a music major, I was like, there's no way I'm getting nominated. And then when I got nominated, I convinced myself that there was no way I was going to win, or be selected. But that really motivated me to put a lot of effort into, writing a very solid application. And I think for me, one of the biggest criticisms of this fellowship, and then in general the other fellowships I've applied to, is that I tend to write like a textbook, um, and so even now I still work on my writing skills and really try to stay away from that textbook-esque writing and shoot more for something that's more humanistic, that can be read by reviewers.
I think you all touch on really good points, because following university nomination, and so the same goes for Florida State as it does for any other university. At that point, you can assume every application moving forward is academically qualified for the scholarship itself. So what are the pairs that are going to be split at the national level? And I think it's impossible to predict what those are, but recommendation letters, like Sophie said, is not insignificant. Authenticity, like Jack is alluding to, is not insignificant. And so that's why I think it is ever so important to make sure that the application, like we've been talking about, is reflective of you and your skills, and or flaws, as whether that's a C+ that you made in college algebra, or trying to explain why your double major makes sense when it makes very clear sense to you. How do you make it make sense to someone who has never spoken to you and doesn't know you? But one of the final remaining questions that I had before we can turn it over to some of the attendees is I know some of you have a little bit more separation from your nomination than others, but can you speak a little bit to after receiving the Goldwater Scholarship, what did that look for you? Maybe in the semester or two that followed, but maybe what does it look like in the year or years since your nomination?
Yeah, I could probably add in here. I think so I just applied in my junior year, and I'm a senior right now at FSU, so not much time difference for me at least. But looking at the graduate school applications I'm looking at, and also into other graduate fellowships as well, it really is a big help because they do ask, what kind of honors you've received, and different things like the Goldwater is a big benefit to add on those applications. So it's it's a pivotal moment, leading up to everything, and it could be a really big help in future applications.
I think that one of the things that one of my old professors told me was that like people who are funded and awarded continue to be funded and awarded, and I applied for many other scholarships and fellowships after Goldwater. Some I didn't get, some I did get. I can't say that it's specifically because of Goldwater, but I have been asked on many, or at least two applications, the Gilman and Hertz, whether I specifically have received the Goldwater Scholarship. And so they are interested in whether you have received that fellowship or not. And so yeah, it also shows when you're applying to grad school that like you have like talked about your research before, and someone else reviewing your application has read it and found it interesting, and so it kind of helps the person that you're applying for grad school to like see that other people thought that you were also good enough to get Goldwater or good enough to get any other scholarship.
I think for me, the biggest thing that came with it was just honestly a major confidence boost. Because without the Goldwater, at this point in my life, I wasn't even sure if I was going to go on and pursue a PhD. I was pretty sure at this point I might go play in a professional orchestra, and it really reaffirmed that yes, I can be a physicist, I can be successful, and just like psychologically, like in my classes and with my peers, I just have so much more confidence now, that knowing that other reviewers slash physicists out there believe in my work. And that's not to say that the Goldwater is the end all say all. I think it's given me a lot of perspective, whether receiving it or not receiving it. It definitely does not define us as researchers. And having mentors and advisors that just really believe in me and have put a lot of faith in me through any process I've been through with Goldwater and with the alike.
Yeah, I actually had a conversation with one of my students this morning, who actually was nominated for the campus process, but ultimately didn't receive the Goldwater at the national end. And part of our conversation was really emphasizing this. Well, she's applying for a very competitive graduate funded fellowship. And in reading through it, so much of the content that she has with even more depth was content that we developed during her Goldwater application cycle. And in that application, she still mentions, this was recognized by my institution. I was still endorsed, even though it didn't win. It still shows that, this was recognized by leaders on campus, faculty on campus, that it's good work. And so I do think you're developing some really transferable skills and content for these postgraduate fellowships that our office also works with. But I think I will pause. I do have one final question regarding advice that you would give to current applicants, but let's save that for like the very, very end. And so for students that we have that are in attendance, if you have specific questions about Sophie or Shahid's or Jack's like experience or research, please feel free to unmute yourself or type into the chat. You can briefly introduce yourself in your field of study and then feel free to ask your question.
So I'm Alex. I apologize for being late. Something came up. Anyways, thanks for having me. I'm interested in applied math, and like you, Jack, I also really struggle with writing like a textbook. I would say I'm very just direct, and I don't know how to like not really embellish, but just like talk about myself in a more human way, I guess is like what you were saying. So I was wondering what kind of advice you had in that regard.
Yeah, so the biggest advice I have that really helped me was I would literally imagine myself in the reviewer's shoes reading my application first and foremost. And like, how would I think if I was a reviewer reading this application? I also got a lot of my family members and girlfriend and other people to read my application because here's a very important thing that I thought was, or here's what I thought was very important is that, so I have a lot of music major friends. I had a lot of them read my application, and if they could not understand my application, I rewrote it. Because one of the biggest lessons I learned was from one of my mentors over the summer in quantum computing, was that the higher up you go, the less physics, math, science a person knows. So the issue isn't necessarily talking about all the fancy math and science and tech and whatnot. It's being able to effectively communicate it to people who may be a few degrees removed, and getting them on your side, wanting to fund your idea. And so, reminding myself of these concepts, having other people who have no clue at all what any of my research is, and then rewriting it accordingly. I think that helped the most.
Thank you.
Other questions? Well, let me transition into one of my other questions that we didn't ask. Is one of the I would say maybe one of the only drawbacks to the Goldwater Scholarship is that most of the fellowships that we work with actually allows you to go and do and research and actually have an experience, whereas Goldwater is scholarship funding and recognition, which is obviously clearly important. Were there other opportunities either at Florida State or other fellowships that you applied to that you would recommend students look into if they have specific interests, or would any of y'all like to talk about that?
I applied for in my junior year an idea grant, which is through Florida State. And with my idea grant, I wanted to go to my PI's postdoc lab in Toronto. And so I also applied for the Gilman Scholarship, which is an international scholarship for Pell Grant recipients. And so I got both of those for my junior year summer, which provided me a lot of experience, a lot of connections. I actually went to a conference last week, and all of the lab members of the lab that I was in were there, and we all hung out like at least every single day. So still connected with them. And so that was like an experience that I got through the IDEA grant and the Goldwater Scholarship. I know that I also applied for REUs that summer, and I think I applied to like 3, and I didn't get any of them. But it was the same summer that I went to Toronto, so I wouldn't have been able to do them anyways. But they are also very useful, and they look very good on applications, any type of application, because they're very competitive. And I also applied for the Quad Fellowship, which if you're a senior, you can apply to. I didn't get it, but it provides you like 1-year funding in grad school, but you can also apply for it like when you're in grad school, and you can apply for it multiple times. And I also applied for the Gilman Ambassador. I also didn't get that, but that's okay. And that gives you also more experience, but this time like reaching out to people who could benefit from being or applying for the Gilman Scholarship. And those are all great opportunities. But the Gilman and IDEA grant are ones that I actually got and benefited greatly from.
In general, you know, my advice is just to apply. That's like honestly my one regret from my senior year of FSU is that I lined up all these projects to work out, and I kind of dropped out of all of them because of massive imposter syndrome, and also because of just some unfortunate life that kind of happened. But I would highly recommend to just apply to like, you know, what she recommended in like Fulbright, Marshall, Rhodes. I was thinking about all of those, and then never really, you know, finished up the NSF GRFP, which I'm currently looking into, and I highly recommend just putting yourself out there, because you just never know which reviewer is willing to take a chance on you. So that's just my big advice.
I will say Sophie did touch on most of the experiences for sure. One thing that I did apply to an NSF REU over the last summer, and I did get into 2 of my really like. So the NSF REU is very competitive. I should start with that. So if you want to get an REU, definitely do at least maybe 10 applications for sure. And I did get into one of the experiences that I really wanted, and it was a really great experience. It's fully funded. They pay for your housing for sure. You also get a stipend as well, and you have a lot of peers that are doing similar research, if not their same kind of research with you. So it's a very great experience if you do get one.
And of course, if anyone has a question, please feel free to chime in. But I think Jack already kind of started this ball rolling. But any other final pieces of advice, either regarding Goldwater specifically, the application, you know, or in general for our first or second or even third year students that might be considering these and other opportunities?
I would say to not be scared to brag about yourself. There is a point to where it's like it comes off really too bold, but I do think that if you are nervous about writing about yourself, you usually would never actually come off as too bold. It's always like the people who are like more timid and shy about writing about themselves, they actually never come off too bold. And I couldn't ever like write good things about myself because I felt weird about it. And I definitely had to learn how to do that. So I would say, like, if you are like nervous writing good things about yourself and like hyping yourself up, to just, just put it on paper and then edit from there. You never want to like hold yourself back. just in case, because yeah, I think Goldwater definitely wants you to brag about yourself a bit. And I think a lot of other applications also want you to brag about yourself, but in a humble way.
Mhm.
I will add that definitely when you're doing these applications, not everything will be perfect. There'll always be some setbacks that you can't really account for. Like, for example, when I was doing my research essay, I really wanted my mentor to review it just for correctness and accuracy of the research, but he never did get to because of how busy his schedule was. So certain things like that could be kind of demotivating, but don't ever let that get the better of you. Just keep on doing the best you can and submit your application.
Any other final words from you, Jack? I know you already offered your advice, but
Yeah.
it was very good. So if you have more.
I suppose, just general advice, tangentially related to the Goldwater, but in general, in terms of like grad school and stuff like that, is that, to really, take a seat back, chill, do some thorough research. I was telling you about this, a few weeks ago, but I made a shocking decision in the physics department when I elected to go to my quote unquote safety school for physics, because I have received a handful of much better financial and much more quote unquote prestigious offers from other universities. But I really could not pass up the opportunity that my PI at Indiana was giving to me. Just for a little context, he was also a music and physics major. Um, and for me, I did a lot of research into, future PIs, which I'm assuming a lot of you will look into eventually. And, he has done, a lot of good work. And, really having that connection to music and being able to relate to me, on a more humanistic level is what absolutely sold me to go to Indiana, and it has made all the difference. Every group meeting we have, he always brings up trumpet playing, and we always chat about music and stuff, and it makes grad school so much more bearable is the wrong word, but exciting, more inviting.
A proper mentor is hard to come by, especially in a PhD program. I do think it makes all the difference. Yeah, it's funny. We never once talked about Indiana when you were talking about grad school applications, and it's just kind of funny how life comes at you fast, But yeah, but I'm glad that you found the right environment. Oh, we do have a question from Ruby. Would it be okay to include information about an unfinished ongoing research project? For any of you three, I'm happy to answer, but I'd rather, how did y'all tackle that when you were working on the Goldwater application?
Yeah, I think all of my projects were unfinished. My research essay was a project that I had coded the experiment for. This was in 2021, so we had the end of 2021, so we had just been able to collect participants, like in-person participants, because I'm do like human neuroscience work. I have to get people inside like an fMRI scanner and scan their brains. So I wasn't anywhere near finished, hadn't even collected data yet. And so, yeah, I think it's totally okay to put unfinished work. Yeah, and like all of my projects were just starting and still ongoing and just theories at some point. So yeah.
I will say something along these lines. Definitely, like, especially with my research project in particular, we weren't getting the results we wanted in our computation. I remember I was doing a little bit of cosmology, but it involved using a lot of Python to do coding and stuff like that. And we just kept on getting unexpected results, especially right before this Goldwater application. So you could only write what you have. And really, if you do explain your research very well, they'll understand that you do know what you're doing. They don't really quantify how well your research is, whether it's finished or successful.
Sound science is sound science. And failure is part of research. And so whether you're at the very forefront of a project or at the very end of a project or somewhere in between, it really doesn't matter. You just have to provide enough context to understand what the scope of that project is or will be. But it's a really good question. I mean, while we have the three here, I know we're kind of running low on time, but any other final technical questions, final thoughts or comments, please feel free to ask. That is all the questions that everyone has. Well, thank you so much to Sophie, Jack, Shahid. It's always a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm confident we probably have a meeting coming up soon to discuss something else. But thank you so much for sharing your insight into this particular scholarship and a few other relevant awards that y'all have mentioned. It's truly invaluable. And it makes my job incredibly easy when I have wonderful students like all of you that I can just instantly reach out to. So also a sincere thanks from me as well. But thank you all so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure, and we'll get this recording out to everyone by next week. Thank you, friends.
For having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.